Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on enhancing remote communication skills. My name is Jeff Scott, and I'm the CEO of Section 810 Communications, and it's my pleasure to welcome everyone as we discuss communication skills, not only in general, but more importantly, how do they impact our current work environment with coronavirus and so many people working from home. In just a moment, I'm going to introduce our special guest, but before I do that, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. Many of you have been participating in the free webinar series we're conducting in the month of April, but for those that are new, due to the large size of the audiences, everyone's line is on mute. However, we do want to give you the opportunity to communicate with us through the session. You'll notice over in your control panel, you have an opportunity to chat or ask a question to the staff. Throughout the presentation, feel free to type in your questions, and we'll be reviewing those. And at the end of today's session, we've allowed ample time to go in and review those questions, read them out loud, and provide answers to you so that the whole audience can hear those as well. Just so I can see that everyone's with us also, you'll notice in your control panel that you have an icon in the form of a hand. So periodically we may ask a question either in the form of a poll or to raise your hand. Right now, if you can hear my voice clearly and see the welcome slide on your screen, please go ahead and raise your hand. Let me just ensure that everyone's hearing me, because there's nothing worse than doing a webinar when no one can hear you. Great. I see pretty much all the hands going up. That's outstanding. Thank you for doing that. So with today's session, we're going to talk about not only communication skills, but again, what about in this remote world? And we'll talk about the 4 different dimensions of connection. When we connect with individuals, there's that first level, or written communication, which can be a little flat and just one-dimensional. We'll talk about phone. In some cases, the lost art of phone conversations and connecting audibly. The third level of connection, or the dimension, is in video. And so many of us are using video so regularly now to connect with others. But the 4th dimension of connection is really that live in person. And that's what we're all missing right now. And we're going to talk about how, while video has ample benefits, it's certainly not the same as when we are in person with someone else or a group of people, and we'll talk about some of those nuances. So today, I'm very pleased to have a special guest with us, and that's Michael Peltz. And Mike is not only an award-winning journalist, but I've had the privilege of working together with him for a number of years, and counted a privilege to call him a friend as well. So while we go ahead and share our screen so that we can say hi to you in person via camera, Mike, thank you for joining us. As always, it's a pleasure to be able to chat with you and be live and in person together.
Jeff, thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate in this webinar. It's incredibly timely. As a journalist, I spent over 25 years a financial journalist, and communication was essential to my job. To be successful as a journalist, you have to communicate. What people I don't think appreciate is, obviously I was a written, I was a writer and an editor, and the written word was incredibly important, but verbal communication is actually the key to being a successful journalist. The ability to go out and report and to talk to people, to communicate and to get information was critical. And, it's a skill you use as a journalist, as a reporter, but it's also a skill you use in business, in meetings. And which is something that I think is extra challenging now, because most of us, all of us, who are really fortunate to have jobs in this environment, we're working remotely, and we've lost the human interaction, the face-to-face interaction, and so often this is the best we can do. Video, phone. Also a lot more texting and messaging, and so it's a different environment. And I think today, hopefully, we'll be able to present some useful information, some useful tips, and based on our experience on how to successfully navigate in a remote world.
Absolutely, and I'm really delighted that you're here with me today as we chat a little bit and let some people from around the world join in our conversation. And you're right, I found that I think there's a delayed reaction. When things started happening where people were forced out to work from home, I don't think everyone realized up front exactly what the impact was going to be. We did a session a couple of weeks ago on best practices for working from home and had an excellent group of panelists, Jordana Upton, Allison Hernandez, Kelly Cadigan, and Kate Brodock. And that's recorded and available on our YouTube channel. But one of the things that we talked about was how people started to realize how much we really did miss that interaction. I think many people thought that video was going to be the same thing. And it's really not the same thing. It's close, but it's not really there. So as we talk today, we're going to talk about 4 different areas or connection spots, if you will, that we dealt with, both when we were at the office and now remotely. And one is that one-on-one communication. It could be discussion with our manager or people on our team or a coworker, just that one-on-one connection. The ability to have those small group meetings when we had a team meeting or different groups that would get together, larger presentations, which affect some more than others, and then, as you mentioned, the written communication. And while we all lean on written communication in our jobs, or many of us do, there are different nuances now with that. So we're going to delve into these 4 areas just a little bit and see if we can provide some practical tips, put a handle on some things that people can use and maybe improve that level of communication a little bit. So we talk a lot about the one-on-one connections, those impromptu meetings or those planned meetings. And it's funny, as you and I planned for today's session, we talked about, okay, when is the right time to use phone versus video versus messaging? Because it's certainly not a one-size-fits-all.
No, for sure, Jeff. I mean, the key in communications in general is, knowing, who your audience is and what your message is or what you're trying to get across or what you're trying to learn. And knowing your audience, knowing if on a one-on-one discussion, certain people, do better with certain kinds of communication. So, FaceTime might make someone uncomfortable, a video call might make someone uncomfortable, but doing a normal call, very much, in their comfort zone. And so if you know that, then that's, going to be the preferred method of communication with that particular person. Messaging, I find has, become really helpful. Where I work now, we've become very used to, since COVID-19, we've really started using Slack a lot. With Slack as a messaging service, it's similar to Skype or similar to text messaging, but it's in a more controlled environment, and it's just very easy to use, and it's a very efficient way of communication. So, depending on what the message is, or you're just trying to, you've got a quick question, and you can have a quick conversation over Slack, and it's great because you can resolve something within a few minutes. Because one of the things that when you find, I think it's more particular to the current environment, because now, what I said earlier, that people are a little bit starved for human interaction, and so when you actually make the formal decision to call someone, whereas in the past, if you were in the office and you picked up the phone, you called someone, they could have been across the room, you called them just, and literally you talk for 30 seconds, boom, you're done. Now when you call, you've got to, you're going to ask how they're doing, you'll talk a little bit about COVID-19 and what's going on, and have you seen Andrew Cuomo today, whatever it might be, but it's less efficient. So I think, for certain kinds of communication, Slack or messaging or texting, is the way to go.
Yeah, I agree. I think for those quick connections, that can be really important. I talk to a lot of people that are using video right now, but the question is, when do we use video? When's the appropriate time to do that? Video can be invasive. If I call you right now on video, it's not like going down to your office, knocking on the door and walking in. I could be jumping right in the middle of your office, which may also double as your family room or your kitchen or your bedroom. And so video can be invasive. What's that?
Which it does. I mean, it literally is. Now I'm in my dining room. So.
Yes, and I'm in my living room. And so at the end of the day, it is, And we talked about this the other day, and you said there's an element of that that actually can be good because it gives us a chance to get a little bit closer with someone and maybe get to know them a little bit more with what's going on.
No, for sure. I think, in a work setting, one of the advantages of being in a work setting, you have that kind of interaction, whether it's in the kitchen or by someone's desk, or you're just, walking down the hall, and you stop, you talk, and you're able to, exchange some information, find out how the person's doing. But those conversations are great. You kind of miss those. But one of the things that happens in those settings, you're not necessarily, you're going to focus more on work than necessarily just start asking them about their family or something unrelated. And now when I call you, you're in your living room, you might have kids in the background, there's things going on. It's much more natural to actually ask more personal questions or get to know a little bit more about the people you work with. So I think we're not in the same room, we're not together, but this is an opportunity to actually get to know people better than we would if we were in the office.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's also a time where it's okay to over communicate because we're missing that in person, and there's a lot of nuances we miss when we're not together with someone in the room. And it's important to key up or prepare messages, if you will. I remember years ago, even before all this took place, I had an email from a manager at the time on a Friday afternoon that said, let's get together Monday morning. And that was it. That was the extent of the email. Well, as you can imagine, my whole weekend was shot. I'm thinking to myself, what happened? What's going on? And Monday morning, after I lost the weekend, he said, I just want to let you know that seminar you did last week, that was really good. You did a really great job with that. I'm thinking, I lost a whole weekend because you wanted to give me a compliment. So it's important now, when we can't read body language, when we can't feel someone's energy, if you will, it's important to make sure that we over communicate to let people know what's happening and whatever channel we use, be it Slack or instant messaging, email, phone, or videos, to make sure that we have that.
Yeah, no, I think over communication is, in this environment, especially with all the concerns about people's health and what's going on and the economy, everyone really needs more communication. So.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things I'm seeing too, when you're spending more time on video and phone and less in person or none in person, the whole concept of active listening comes into play. And people say, what's active listening? It's really just making sure that you're hearing what the other person is saying. When we used to do training sessions on active listening, we would actually use a physical prop, if you will, and it was a feather. And the story goes back to Native Americans, where if two chiefs had a conflict or discussion, one would pull a feather out of their headdress, give it to the other one, and as long as that chief had the feather in their hand, they were the only ones that could talk. And it gave the other person a chance to make sure they were actually listening and actively listening. When they were finished, they'd pass the feather over. Well, we're not with each other. We can't pass feathers or do things like that, but it's important to do active listening. One of the things I like to think of is the acronym WAIT, W-A-I-T. Why am I talking? And sometimes when we just think in those terms, it gives us a chance to say, okay, let me make sure I'm really hearing what the other person's saying. And it's really important when there's a conflict or a difficult message going on, when you can't feel that other person's body language or their presence.
Yeah, so if you could pass the virtual feather back to me, it does. I think this idea of active listening is really, it really resonates with me and from my experience when I was a journalist, because, one of the keys to when you're out, you're reporting is to get information, is to not talk too much. I've been in conversations in interviews with people, with another journalist, where literally that journalist did more talking than the person we were interviewing. And at the time, this was an interview up at Yale University with Bob Schiller, who's a renowned economist. And the reporter who I was with literally spoke as much as he did. One of the things that you can learn, though, is that sometimes in conversations, one-on-one conversations, there are going to be pauses, and sometimes those pauses may get a little uncomfortable. We're either both people are thinking, and that it's important not to necessarily rush to fill the space. Let the person give the person an opportunity to say what they, to kind of push the conversation forward. As a reporter, it was critical because the best stuff I got was like I would just sit there and the person would stop talking, and then 15, 20 seconds later, that dead silence was driving that person crazy to start talking again, and they would reveal more than they initially, were prepared to.
Mm-hmm. That's really true. If we sit in a room together, that silence isn't that uncomfortable. But if we're on a video call or a phone call, it's, 10 seconds can be just an eternity of silence. And you're right, it's more of a challenge. So, and talking a lot, you're right, I have to remind myself that. I heard years ago, someone said, as long as you're talking, you'll never learn anything new. And I thought that's pretty true. So it's important to be listening. Let's jump ahead to the next area of connection. That's really in small groups. Again, when we're in the office, we may get together with a team or cross-functional teams and we brainstorm things. And these are often planned meetings, but not necessarily. They can be impromptu also.
Yes, I mean, I think, some of the best meetings that, I've had certainly have not been planned where, you just, literally it's in the pantry, you're getting a cup of coffee and there's, 2 or 3 people there. You're all, kind of involved in a project, and, it's just a great opportunity. Okay, like let's convene. Let's just, we're just talking, but, we can get stuff done. We can actually share information that's useful to kind of move that project forward. And, rather than having, planned a meeting, finding a time on everybody's calendar when they're available, in 10 or 15 minutes that people just happen, we happen to be in the same place, we're actually able to get real work done. And so those impromptu meetings, we've obviously, that's hard to do now. We're,
Yes.
People working remotely. It's just, you almost have to kind of try to force it a little bit. And one of the things I'm actually doing now is just setting up conversations with people that I don't necessarily work with on a day-to-day basis, but there is some overlap in kinds of some of the things that they're doing, and just catch-up meetings, just setting aside 15 minutes or half hour to do a call, and for that I actually find video is really effective, because you want that sort of the more personal connection that you get with video. So video in this for the and that I think you can also do that with smaller groups too. So it doesn't need to be confined to just one-on-ones.
Right.
That you can actually create some impromptu meetings, and just again, I go back to understanding the different communication channels. And so let's say you use messaging. You could send out a message to 3 or 4 people and say, okay, yeah, let's get on a quick call here. There's something that might be interesting for all of us to talk about.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, it's funny, we talked a little bit about how certain people have different preferences in the method of communication. People that are more outgoing, gregarious, may prefer more of that video or talking, whereas others may be a little bit more prone to the written. Let's do a quick poll here for the audience. We're going to pull something up on your screen here with a question. We'll do several of these today. And the question is, when you have unscheduled contact with someone, if they're reaching out to you and it's unscheduled, what do you prefer the method of communication be? Would you prefer if they reached out to you via email, phone, a messaging system like IM or Slack, or a video call? What's your preference? Let's just leave this open for a few seconds. If you wouldn't mind putting in your answers, and I'll read back the results in just a moment. So if someone's going to reach out to you and you weren't expecting them to reach out to you, do you want them to just call you, send you an email, do some sort of a message notification, or do a spontaneous video call? We'll leave this open for just another moment or so. And let's take a look at some of these results. Okay, so we don't have a lot of people that are interested so much in the video calls spontaneously. So looks like 37% of you would prefer someone reached out to you via email. 40% would prefer if they reached out to you via messaging system like Slack. So Yeah, 77%. 20% said phone, and there's 3% that are saying, please call me on video. I want to see somebody. So it looks like the majority of you would like to be responded to or reached out to in that way. Okay, that's helpful information to see. So however we do that, reaching out, you're right, those small group meetings can be effective, and they go beyond just work. I mean, they can be getting together socially, again, either planned or impromptu.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you're seeing a lot of across companies right now are Zoom happy hours. I know, my company, we've done a few of those. They're kind of fun. They can be a little awkward. I think people are learning Zoom etiquette. Where if you have more than a handful of people on screen at a time, it's who talks, and how do you make sure that everybody's engaged in the conversation. And one of the things I tell you about is last night I had a Zoom call with probably about 15 of my former fraternity brothers from college. And this is, we did this call, I think, one of the guys, because of what's going on with COVID-19, he decided it would be a great time to actually reach out and get us together and get us on a video call. Probably about, most people hadn't spoken to in close to 30 years. And it was a little awkward initially, but we actually fell right into the kind of old patterns, and so you do see, I think, it was great. It was really nice reconnecting with people. And I think, we've already planned another one for next month. But you do see kind of the dynamics of a meeting, in that kind of setting where, and it's really magnified on these video calls where, unlike when you're sitting around a conference room table, and I think it's a little easier for people to interact on Zoom or on a video. You got to really forcefully get yourself into the conversation. So one of the things that you can do if you're trying to make a meeting, whether it's personal or professional, make it more effective, is that be mindful that not everyone it's not their personality to necessarily speak up. How can you get them involved? It's really important. You want them to feel like they're a part of that conversation and to do things. Pull them in.
Yeah, I think you're right. The dynamics, when we're not in the room with someone, we're missing, again, that fourth dimension of connection. We're missing that body language. Even on video, you can't capture the full essence of it. The energy or feeling someone's even mood, things like that. It's challenging. On the slide here, we talked about moderation and collaboration, and I remember laughing when we put that together, thinking, some moderation to some people might mean something completely different right now. But what we're really talking about is moderating a meeting, participating and collaborating together. I know in the past, I had an opportunity to work with a team that was global in nature. And every couple of weeks, we'd have an ongoing team call. We might have 70 or 100 people on from a dozen different countries. And one of the things we would do is we'd rotate the responsibility of moderating that call, because it would give people a chance to, in practice, their ability to facilitate and be a leader in that way, but also kind of pass the baton a bit and let other people have a chance. Because you're right, these video meetings, sometimes you see the dynamics where there's someone who typically is the dominant presence in that conversation. And in a remote environment, it's easier to hide. And it's easier, not even consciously to hide, but to subconsciously become lost. And I think one of the important things is for people really just to speak up and to make sure that they're not letting themselves get lost.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely, Jeff. And it's just, it's hard. I think it magnifies, the dominant personality. I'm seeing it on every Zoom call or every video call I've been on, that there's, and most of them have not been professional. I mean, these bigger ones, a lot of them have just been, more personal, and inevitably one or two people dominate. And it's much more so than would happen if we were actually in the room together.
Yeah, and in a room dynamic, certainly it is different. I was reading an article the other day by it was from Women 2.0. It's the organization that Kate Brodock runs, and it was talking specifically about how, unfortunately, women very often may not be given that same platform to speak in a meeting, or maybe spoken over more. And so it was talking about practical steps to make sure that doesn't happen. And And one of the things is making sure that your volume is appropriate. Some of us don't have a high level of volume when we speak. And what I found in dynamics, you're laughing, maybe I have too much volume at times. But it's funny, we've seen even in live meetings where people speak very timidly and their voice gradually increases in volume. And if you're trying to get attention when there's a dozen people on a Zoom call, you said, sometimes it's a matter of picking up that volume a little bit. Or I found if two people are talking over each other, or if one person seems to be perpetually spoken over, sometimes in a decent volume, it's okay to say, go ahead, you go first. And by doing that, it's a little bit funny, but people will tend to reciprocate that. And the next time someone might say, I think Mike wanted to say something, or what were you saying, Mike? Sometimes when we proactively say, you go ahead first, but we do it with a little bit more volume and confidence, it gives the mic back to us, or gives that feather back to us, if you will. So I think that's an element that could be helpful if people find themselves getting lost in those calls.
Yeah, no, definitely, Jeff. Very helpful.
So I think when we moving ahead here into larger presentations, this is an area, and before we do that, just real quick, we just talked about feeling a little bit of an imbalance in participation. I'm just curious, we're going to run another poll here. And the question is, in group meetings, have you seen that there's been an imbalance of participation? In other words, are you seeing that a couple of people always dominate the call and others tend to be lost in the shuffle? Are you seeing that there's maybe a little bit of an imbalance? Or in your world, is there no imbalance at all and everybody is equally participating? Let's leave this open for a moment and see how the answers are coming in. So again, when you're in a group setting, are you finding an imbalance where it's weighted more towards a few people? And it looks like that's the vast majority right now. We'll leave that open just a couple of seconds more. How is it in your group meetings? All right, so let's close that. So we've got 71% of you said there is definitely an imbalance in your meetings. There people are dominating and people are getting lost. 23% said a little, and only 6% said that everybody participates equally. That just confirms this certainly is a challenge. I think it's an opportunity for managers also to encourage participation and make sure that people are being called by name and that the baton is being passed to get around. It's an interesting dynamic. So let's switch over, Mike, talk a little bit about larger presentations. You know, as we're doing this today, we've got an audience all around the world that's entirely muted. And sometimes I'm glad I have you to look at and speak to, but sometimes when you're doing a remote, it could be a training session to a team, could be 3 people, could be 300. That raises a totally different set of dynamics, because now not only is it the fear of speaking, which we know is #1 fear, public speaking, but it adds the nuances of technology. You know, what if something breaks? What if it doesn't go right? That can be a challenge.
No, definitely. And I think it was interesting. And when I was a journalist, I used to moderate panels. I used to, we did awards presentations, and I got used to speaking in front of audiences with a few hundred people, even more. And, you key off the audience. Mm-hmm. And it's really critical because, it makes you comfortable because you pick out people in the audience and you're talking to them. And so it's not, it helps take the edge off that initial fear, standing up in front of a large group. Here, it's just, Jeff and I are just staring at our computers. We're hoping that people are still on. It seems like most people haven't left yet. So
that's a good thing.
Doing okay. But it's really, we're just, our energy is coming from ourselves. And fortunately, it's actually very helpful having 2 of us here. But it's really tough when, when you speak before a crowd, it's actually much easier to get energy and focus from that crowd. And one of the things I was telling Jeff about this, a couple of days ago, that it's really evident if you watch late night TV, if you watch, Trevor Noah, Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, those guys are very, in varying degrees are used to appearing before a live studio audience. And in some cases, like Stephen Colbert, his whole, show was really built off of the energy of the audience and his connection with the audience. And it has taken him, a solid 2 weeks to really finally start to get comfortable with the fact that he's just in a room with a camera and his son behind the camera filming, and that's about it. And so he has no audience to key off of. Whereas if you look at Trevor Noah, and my wife and I had the opportunity a year ago to actually see him live do a show, and it was amazing. But what was really cool was that while he's filming, he's not even looking toward the audience. He's actually, the camera is slightly off to the side, and he's looking directly into that camera, and he's performing to the camera. And so now you watch him, and literally from day one when he started the social distancing show, he didn't miss a beat because he didn't need the audience. And so getting used to the fact that you can find energy and you can find inspiration and excitement in yourself and in the words that you're saying, makes a big difference to hopefully engaging an audience.
Yeah, I would agree. I know for me, I've had the privilege of speaking a lot over the years of my career, and I enjoy the audience. I enjoy that energy of being with somebody, and again, reading body language, hearing whether it's laughter or hopefully not seeing too many eyes rolling, but you can key in off that energy from the audience. And I remember the first time I did a webinar, and as soon as I said good morning, I realized it was me and a phone. This wasn't even video. It was just talking to a phone, and I thought, I can't see you. I can't hear you. I can't even hear you shuffling in your seat like I can on a regular conference call. It's very, very unnerving. So for those of you that are doing that, maybe for the first time, if you're asked to do something to a group at work or even external with clients or something else, it's okay to be nervous. And it's almost like you have to shift your attention, like you said, Mike, to the camera and try to talk to people one-on-one. There may be 50 or 100 or 1,000 people, but it's just trying to talk with them each on a one-on-one basis. It can be a challenge. The other thing with technology, and I want to move on looking at the time here, but is have backup plans. I remember one time I was working in the quantitative finance industry, and we used to do a series of training sessions for people around the world online. And one time we were ready, and we'd always check out the technology, test it first. And just as we were getting ready to start the session, I was facilitating, but the actual teacher, her line went mute. Something happened and her phone just stopped, and she didn't realize it. And so I would say something that her line was muted, but she couldn't even hear me. And so it was a challenge for a few minutes, and we realized we need to have our phones up and we need to have the chat window open. Make sure that you have different ways for people to communicate and make sure that your message is coming across to the audience. But it definitely brings on a different dynamic of challenges. So one of the biggest areas of challenges as we go into the, well, real quick, just energy is one of the most important areas that we talked about sharing today. When you're presenting to an audience remotely, it's really important to have energy. The slide up here is just part of one of the teachings we do on making a presentation special, and the E in special stands for energetic. If people can't see you, if they can't be in the room with you, it's that much more important to make sure you've got voice intonation, pregnant pauses, proper volume, just to keep that energy going properly.
And also smile. Right,
yes.
Jeff? Smile.
Yes. I'll try to work on that. But it's so important. People don't know that smiles have physiological benefits and that they release endorphins and neurotransmitters in our brains to make us feel better. But smiles that people can see you are also very easily reciprocated. For some reason, when we smile, people feel obligated to smile back. It makes it a little bit more enjoyable. So that's why I'm glad I get to look at your smile today, Mike. This is helpful.
Very welcome.
We talk about written communication. You're the expert here with your extensive journalism experience, but written communication can be a challenge in the best of times, and I think even more so now.
Yeah, definitely. I think, written communication has become increasingly important for people in general. As a journalist, it was part of my job, and that was the way I really interacted with the world and got my message across. But in the business world, I mean, it's written communication is just so important, and there's so many different ways to do it. That you've got, there's kind of a spectrum, starting from text messages all the way to, more formal memorandums, and it's important to understand. We have on the slide there form follows function. Knowing what is your goal here, what are you trying to attempt to do with that written communication, and choosing the right form for it. There's certain things that things you're trying to get done. Messaging is perfect. It's simple, it's straightforward. It's really you don't need a written record of it. But you do want to get something done, quickly and efficiently, and so messaging works really nicely. For other stuff, in the corporate world, where you write emails, in part to get information, to get something done, but also, you're writing it so there's a record, so there's a written record that you were trying to do something. I mean, you have a job, and there are certain expectations that that come along with that job. So you use email as a way to try to get things accomplished, but also to show that you're trying to get things accomplished. And so email is I can't stress enough that how it's worth taking a little extra time. I know there are some people that really dash off their emails very quickly. I will write an email and then I'll read it. I'll always read it one more time before hitting send. And one of the things that I try to do in terms of email communication is, I'm cognizant of people's time and people's attention spans. So knowing that, and this is really translates from my years as a journalist, where less is more. That you can be more effective with fewer words, but they're more impactful, more direct, more clear. And so when you write an email, go through it. If you can remove 20% of it, because and so it's getting to the point, what you're trying, that you're trying to make with that person, it will be more effective. The other thing is in terms of timing. When you send written communication is really important. You want to send it at a time when you actually think it's going to get read, or and get. And so if you work with someone who has a habit of looking at email maybe only a couple of times a day, then try to identify what those times of day are, and write those, send those emails so you're going to kind of hit that sweet spot, that period. So if you want a prompt response, you're more likely to get one. And as kind of a corollary to that is that when you send that email, don't go off to lunch and disappear for a minute. Because if you expect someone to react quickly, and often an email prompts another email, that prompts another email, and there's a chain here. You're using it as a way to communicate. You need to be in a position to answer that email. I mean, one of the things that you can do, which is very helpful, and I certainly do a lot more of it than I used to, is using my phone to do email. So if I do have to run off to get something to eat, I'll have my phone and I'll be watching. And if someone responds, I'll respond right away on my phone. So there's no pause.
Yeah, I agree. Being available, and I think you hit a really key point, and that's just reading and rereading an email. I remember years ago I got an email. Again, email is one-dimensional. We talk about the four elements or four various degrees of connection, and email is that first one, that written, because it's flat. It doesn't convey emotions. No matter how many emojis you use, or capital letters or exclamation points, it's difficult to convey emotions. I remember years ago getting an email from a manager at the time, and as I read the email, it came across very, very curt, very negative, and I was bothered by it a lot, and I was annoyed, and I was going to key off an email back, and I said, no, wait a minute, let me just give him a call. And I picked up the phone, and he said, Jeffrey, how are you? And I realized, wow, I completely misread his email, because he didn't convey the emotion of what he really wanted to do. So be careful when you send it, and then know when it's time to pick up the phone. Sometimes when we have a difficult situation or a conflict and emails can go back and forth, there's a time when it's okay to say, can we talk about this? Can I call you? When's a convenient time? Let's go on a video chat. And then let that the other areas of emotion come into play, because we can get stuck sometimes in that one-dimensional email for sure.
Yeah, I think some of this is also generational too. That I find that I'm not trying to stereotype millennials, but I do find that millennials, I guess I am stereotyping them. I do find that they are more comfortable emailing and messaging than talking on the phone. I mean, especially if it's someone that you're not necessarily that you work with regularly. Once it's different if it's someone on your team or someone you work with closely.
Yeah.
But there's a more of, that's just the way that they've communicated, growing up.
No, it's different. The other thing about email, we talk about, Danger Will Robinson. What does that mean? Some of us are old enough to remember the original TV series Lost in Space, or the movie that came out a few years ago about that. And in that movie, in that series, it was a robot that would say, Danger Will Robinson, when there was impending danger. And with emails, we have to be really careful because there can be impending danger. The expression, conversations for yet a moment, but an email's for a lifetime. And sometimes we send an email, it can take a life of its own. It can be forwarded, it can be shared online, it can be reviewed. There's so many different elements. And that concept of being careful before you hit send, it applies all the time. But I think even more now as people are home and the lines are so blurred between work and home, being careful about emails, I think, applies even more.
Well, Jeff, one thing I think you had one more poll you wanted to do about email etiquette.
Yeah, let's take a look and see. With that, we were talking about this. It's for the audience. Mike and I were chatting the other day. Is it appropriate to be texting or emailing during a meeting? In other words, whether it's an in-person meeting or even now on video, if people can see you with your phone, is it appropriate to text or email? Some people say absolutely. And I know I've worked with people over the years that they're always on their phone. And sometimes I feel like I'm not really getting their attention. Other times people are totally off their phone. So what do you think as an audience? We'll give this a few seconds here. Is it appropriate to text or email during a meeting when people can see you on your phone? Absolutely, you think it's appropriate and multitasking is an absolute, or it depends on several factors, sometimes yes, sometimes no, or definitely inappropriate and rude, because I think people have different feelings about this. We'll let that sit open for just a moment. Mike, you're going to be surprised with some of these results here. Just another couple of seconds and we'll close it down. In about 5 minutes, we're going to open up the session to Q&A. So again, feel free to type in your questions in that section of your control panel as we go through with this. Okay, so I'll close down the polls right now. And it looks like 31% say it is definitely inappropriate and rude to be doing texting or emails during a meeting. 69% says it depends in some cases. And 0% said absolutely it's appropriate to do that. Multitasking is necessary. So that's interesting to see. I would tend to be somewhere between the middle and the bottom of definitely inappropriate. I know when I'm speaking or if I'm in a meeting and I see someone's got their phone and they're doing their thing, I feel like they're not paying attention to whoever's speaking at the time. So that's interesting, 69 and 31%.
Yeah, no, Jeff, I'd agree with you. I mean, before, when I was a journalist in my last job, I thought it was really rude for people to even bring phones into me, let alone look at them. And now I've changed that because I work at a firm where it's fast paced and there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's just efficient, that to be able to answer email when you're not at your desk, especially when you end up in a lot of meetings during the course of a day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it may be part of it is realizing how many times do you have to say, I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Because you can't multitask or hear, the same thing. So different schools of thought on that for sure. But before we leave this slide, one of the nuances right now in this whole work from home environment, again, the lines are blurred. Our office is our living room or kitchen or bedroom, wherever it may be. And it's even more important that we're cognizant of when we're responding to emails. I know that people, if they're relaxing at night a bit, or maybe they're just tired from a long day and they're doing email, our judgments can be impacted if we're fatigued or in a different frame of mind. So it's really important to watch that email, understand the permanence of it. I think that's just something I'd like to really emphasize for the audience. Just be aware of when you're sending something that you know is going to take a life of its own.
Yeah, especially if it's a sensitive topic. When in doubt, save it as a draft and look at it the following morning, and think if you still want to send it.
Yeah, I would agree with that one for sure. So let's take just a few minutes here. Again, we're going to open up to questions. Before we do this, if anyone's interested in learning more about Section 810 communications, you have a handout section in your control panel. You can download a brochure to learn a little bit more about what we do. We're running this full series of free webinars through the month of April. But if you're interested in learning how we can help your company with specific training or custom environments, just feel free to reach out and let us know. But Mike, we talk about some key takeaways. What do we really want people to walk away from today from the session? And one of them was knowing your audience. And I know you were really emphatic about, you wanted to make sure people recognize how important this is.
No, for sure. And Jeff and I toyed with the idea of actually putting know your audience on every slide, but really it's understood that to be an effective communicator, you need to know who you're communicating to. If you don't understand that, or and in some cases it's not easy. I mean, you won't necessarily have a full understanding of what motivates that person, how that person operates, what works well with that person, who doesn't work. But you need to try. You need to be aware of your audience, because if you're not, it's the key to successful communication. Without that, it doesn't matter if you do everything else right.
Yeah, I agree. And last week we had the webinar last week was on understanding each other through DISC personality assessments. And again, that session is recorded. It's on the Section 810 Communications YouTube channel. But understanding your audience, because everybody is different, that is huge. We talked about encouraging engagement, and we saw from the poll that the majority of people see that there really is an imbalance between who's actively participating. Now is not the time to get lost, and it's unfortunately more of a risk, and it's easier to get lost in this environment of working remotely. But encourage engagement, both yourself to be more outgoing, more confident in watching that you're participating, but also as a leader, make sure your team has that opportunity to collaborate and really evenly be involved in actively engaging with each other. And I think hand in hand with that is letting your personality show. What we mean by that is just be present, be visible.
Well, and also be afraid to actually to reveal things about yourself and share, aspects of your life, as part, I mean, now our professional and personal lives have blurred. I mean, it's clear. I'm in my living room. My wife's downstairs with 4 dogs. I'm just praying that they stay downstairs and don't go up. So it's just a reality. But I do think you'll make stronger connections and you'll be a more effective communicator if you actually bring some of your personality into your communications.
Yeah, I completely agree. Before we hit this last point, because you know how important the concept of influence is, one more poll that I want to launch. And the poll here is, we want you to rate your personal feeling of connection with your manager and your team right now. In some cases, people might say, I'm totally connected. There's no difference than it was before. Others might be saying, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable, a little disconnected. And some might say, I am totally disconnected. I feel out of the loop. I'm not informed, and I feel lost right now. So let's give it a moment. Again, how are you feeling right now with this current environment? Do you feel like things are just as they used to be? Is it a little different, or are you really struggling with this and feeling disconnected? We'll leave this open for just a few more seconds. Okay, so we'll go ahead and close that poll. So this is good. 50% of you say you feel totally connected and there's no difference than before. That's outstanding, and that indicates that you and your managers and your team, you're doing a good job. So congratulations. About 38% of you said you're feeling a bit disconnected, a little bit. It's not terrible, but there's a little disconnection. And then 12 of you, unfortunately, are feeling that total disconnection, that you're out of the loop. If that's the case, I certainly encourage you, be proactive yourself. Even if you're not a manager, reach out to your manager. Make sure that you're being as proactive as you can about this whole concept and making sure that people are connected. And that ties in, Mike, to the last point. That's grow your influence. One of the goals we have at Section 810 Communications is helping people increase their level of influence. And I think that right now, this is the time to make sure that you're seen, you're heard, and you're exerting your own level of influence. Influence isn't only for managers, it's for all of us. Now's the time. We were talking before about the sports analogy, and I hope my friends who are also Giants fans, as I am with American football, can not hold this against me. But if you look at a quarterback like Tom Brady with the New England Patriots, he was proven in the fire. There's so many times that he led comebacks in the last moments of a game under crisis. And I feel that just as in sports, in business, it's times of crisis that proves who are the true leaders. Who are those people that others want to work for and with? And who are the team members that the good leaders and managers want on their team? Now is a time to make sure that you're present, you're visible. Don't let yourself fall behind. Don't let yourself become lost or obscure. Make sure that your visibility is there, because that will increase your influence as well. So we've got a few minutes. Go ahead, Mike, please.
To add to that, I think this is a unique time, and hopefully it's a finite time, and it will end. But it's an opportunity to actually focus on your communication, things that you took for granted when you were just out working and interacting with people face to face and in normal course of doing business. That's gone, and now you can actually focus on improving those communication skills remotely. So when you go, hopefully we go back into a more normal environment at some point in the future, you'll be better for it. It's a great opportunity to I know personally I'm so much more appreciative of everything around me. It's just that the things I took for granted before this, and communication is one of them.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. I'm looking at the questions, Mike, that are coming in. There are several that are coming in. Here's an interesting one, and that's, what are some good things that a manager can do to create a positive virtual team culture? Well, we could probably spend a good bit of time on that one. What are your thoughts on that, Mike? How can a manager create a good virtual team culture?
It definitely, communication is going to be critical to that. Trying to reach out on a regular basis. You don't have to necessarily do it daily with all your team members, depending on the size of the team, but it's really important that people feel connected, and also informed. Providing real information about what's going on both within your team and more broadly within your company. So as a manager, you're a conduit of information to your team. Your team has a certain job to do, and it's hopefully doing it despite the fact that you may be working remotely. But that you don't operate in a vacuum, and it really helps. The more information, the more connected you are as a manager outside your team, and then you can bring that information in. So it's important to do now, especially. But again, it's like as I said a few minutes ago, I think the lessons we learn here, we take back into the world, into our businesses when hopefully we're not all working remotely.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. We've got time for a couple more questions here. Here's a good one, and it is, can you please give any practical advice from your experience on how to involve shy, passive participants? If you've got a group conversation, how do you make them feel that they belong, but not go too far and make them feel uncomfortable? That's a great question, Yelena. And I think there's a couple of different areas. Again, when we teach on the DISC personality assessment, and some that would fall into the the S or C area, which is more of an introverted, laid back environment, and they're not going to be the ones to necessarily speak out. Sometimes it's generally asking for their participation. If I were to say, Mike, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that? Or you mentioned something to me the other day, maybe you can share about that. Gently bring them in, because again, speaking even in a small group can make some people really uncomfortable and really feel shy, but that's what leads to that over participation by some people. Asking them by name, just to encourage them to come in that way. As a leader, making sure, looking at your group and saying who's doing most of the talking. If someone's doing too much talking, it's okay to call them by name too. Not to say, be quiet, you talk too much, that would be rude, but to say something like, Bill, let's listen to what Elena has to say here, because I think she has a good point. It's when you address people by name, they tend to respond more than you speak generally. So that's one area that I would say. Mike, there's go ahead, please.
Just to add there that I think in addition to trying to pull them in, also don't set them up for failure. Don't ask them something that you know they're going to have a hard time answering.
Yes.
Once a person who's a little reluctant to participate, if they've gotten burned a couple of times, they're going to be very reluctant to participate. And not thinking about those meetings and not wanting to go to those meetings because they're afraid that they're going to get called on and they're not going to be able, they won't be prepared.
Yeah, I would agree, and it may not be the best idea as I'm doing. If I see a question here, it's a great question, but I don't have a clue on the answer. I just ask you your thought on that. So I figured because you're quick and think on your feet well. There's another question here, and it's in fact two questions from, ironically, from the same individuals. How do you scream at your coworker while he's working from home? And then the second question is techniques to pacify a person from work over the phone. And I'm not sure if the second one is a direct result of the first one, but and maybe I can rephrase that, and that is, how do you correct someone? How do you have those difficult conversations when they're home? And again, how do you pacify someone? Emotions come into play a lot more now than they did before, and people are feeling oftentimes a sense of insecurity and anxiety with what's going on. And as a leader, I think it's really important to recognize that if there's correction that needs to take place, first of all, Mike, I'd like your thoughts too. I think video is much more effective than just a phone, and certainly than email or chatting, is to be able to see them. Because even in correction, as a manager, there's empathy that goes along with that. And it's making sure that people are still feeling a level of security, which ties into pacifying, or I'll translate that maybe into comforting a person or reassuring a person. And I think that video, as close as you can, get to the level of emotion with a person so that you can connect on a level beyond just that first dimension. What are your thoughts, Mike?
In terms of video, I mean, I agree with you, Jeff, that when you have more sensitive subjects, that you're discussing with someone, video is more effective. Or if you're in a position, not hopefully no one is screaming, but where you do have to correct someone and it might be a little bit uncomfortable, I think video can be very effective. But what you want to do though is make sure that you integrate video as a regular part of your communication. So I don't want to, if I always talk to you on the phone or do it through email, but when I have something difficult, it's going to be video. Then every time you want to have a video call with me, I start to get very nervous. So it needs to be just integrated into the regular, communication flow.
Yeah, I would agree for sure. Just one more quick question. We're about 4 minutes after the top of the hour, and we'll close the session after this. And it's a great question from Sophia. It says, if you're meeting clients, somebody externally on the video call for the first time, what are some tricks or tips to engage and get to know them? That's a great question, and I think it can be a multifaceted answer. Sophia, one of the things I would encourage you to do, last week we did a session on DISC personality assessments, just understanding how people communicate and some of their strengths and challenges. And we recorded that session, and it's on the YouTube channel under Section A10 Communications. You might want to take a look at that, and there's some teaching videos there available on DISC as well, because a lot of it is knowing your audience. there are some tips as far as asking open-ended questions that may be social in nature, but not too social, engaging their response. For example, someone, if you say, wow, how are you doing with these changes? If someone just says, that's tough, okay, they might be of a personality that they're more factual oriented. They're not going to be quick to show emotions. Someone else might say, oh my gosh, the other day my dog got outside, and they go in right into storytelling mode. And at that point, you recognize a little bit more about who they are. So there are a number of different things you can do, but I encourage you to take a look at that video because we talk in much more depth about that. So Mike, we're 5 minutes after the top of the hour. As always, it's great to chat with you, and I'm glad we're able to conduct this session. Any last thoughts for the audience before we close down the session?
Sure. No, Jeff, I want to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this webinar. As I said earlier, I mean, communication is, I mean, it's kind of been central to my professional career, and certainly to my personal life. It's it's critical. I mean, being more aware and focusing on communication and improving that communication. It's critical, especially now. It's just like we are. You were talking before about I mean, people are unsettled, and there's cabin fever. People haven't left their apartments or homes. They haven't seen people in weeks, and it's really tough. And we have this sort of, we're going through this together, and we'll get through it together. And communication is going to be how we do it. So, I can't stress enough that just talk to people, text them, message them, whatever it takes.
Yeah, I would completely agree. And to the audience, again, feel free to join us. We've got another couple of sessions left in the free series, all about soft skills and communication in these unsettling times. Feel free to join us on any of those. You can find all of them listed on the training page under section810.com. I want to thank everyone for participating. It's been our pleasure to chat with you and invite you into the conversation today. We hope you were able to take away one or two tips that you can use to enhance your remote communication. And above all, be safe, be healthy and well, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Mike. Goodbye now.
Take care, everybody.